Putin mentioned this repeatedly. We will work with any American leader. We will remain ready to work with any U.S. leader who the U.S. people elect and which the leader will be willing to engage in equitable, mutually respectful dialogue. I wish to recall once again what I stated during the Trump administration.
I heard the same thing you did. He's in favor of peace, in favor of ending the assistance that's been provided. And we can only welcome that because that's what we need to stop pumping Ukraine full of weapons. And then the war will end.
Mr. Minister, how do you foresee Russia-U.S. relations if former President Trump is elected, particularly with his vice presidential pick, JD Vance, who has commented extensively about Ukraine? I asked you this question in January, but things have changed, and now he is the nominee of the GOP. Thank you.
Well, perhaps something has changed, but it's not our position. You are well aware that we do not interfere in other states' domestic affairs. This includes the United States. We worked with President Trump. We had contacts. He met with President Putin. He hosted me a few times in the White House. Irrespective of his mindset at the time, during the Trump period, the sanctions war began. Obama began this war. Let's state that to be fair. But under Trump, there were more and more sanctions that were imposed. Economic sanctions, diplomatic sanctions were imposed. However, at that time, as I mentioned already, dialogue was underway between us and Washington at the highest levels. Right now, there is no such dialogue. There was a meeting in June 2021 between Presidents Putin and Biden in Geneva, but after the start of our special military operation, after we explained exhaustively the fact that we have no choice but to defend our security interests, but to defend those people who the Kiev regime labeled terrorists and who have been bombing. They've been bombing every day. After that, there were no longer any contacts, especially at that level. There are sporadic talks taking place, telephone conversations at times. The head of the CIA, Bill Burns, met with the director of the Domestic Intelligence Service last year on neutral territory. There are some telephone conversations at various levels. However, when it comes to substance, we have not seen anything substantive happening here. And when our U.S. colleagues, for example, Jake Sullivan recently announced that we absolutely have to renew dialogue with Russia on strategic stability, we are proposing, and Russia is rejecting it all. Well, this is completely shifting blame, and that is evident that this dialogue on strategic stability requires the presence of relations, first and foremost, mutually respectful relations on equal footing, and all of this was set out in the documents we reached with the U.S., including the strategic offensive arms. But when you label publicly, Austin, I believe, labeled Russia the enemy, the main threat. We need to do everything possible for Ukraine to win, he said. Biden was recently quoted, the U.S. president recently said that if Russia wins in Ukraine, then, I believe this is a direct quote, Poland will disappear and other countries up to the Balkans will perceive themselves to be more independent, and they will comport themselves in a more independent way. So if we give some thought to this, it's a deep thought. In Ukraine, the Russians need to be vanquished for the US to then preserve completely under its command all of Europe. And that's the essence here. So I'll reiterate that, and Putin mentioned this repeatedly, we will work with any American leader. We will remain ready to work with any US leader who the US people elect, and which the leader will be willing to engage in equitable, mutually respectful dialogue. I wish to recall once again what I stated during the Trump administration. Despite the very serious sanctions, there was still dialogue underway. And this is useful in any case. The European Union, which was established in order to ensure the well-being, prosperity, and stability of all of its members, has now completely morphed into an appendage of NATO. And just as aggressively, and perhaps even more aggressively, there are demands for Russia to be vanquished. What kind of strategic dialogue is this? Or any other kind of dialogue can we even talk about here? And if our colleagues give this a second thought, if they surmount this mania of their own exceptionalism, their own impunity, their own superiority, then we'll sit down with them. We'll listen to what they have to tell us. But if when it comes to running around and trying to persuade them, that's not how we operate. It's not part of our tradition.
Susan Tehrani from India's WION International Network. My question is somewhat a follow-up to Pam's about Senator JD Vance's recent comments, not only about him criticizing aid to Ukraine, but he also called for negotiated peace in Ukraine, and he's been a critic of the Biden administration's overall policy when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I'd like to get your views on his recent comments about aid to Ukraine.
Well, I heard the same thing you did. He's in favor of peace, in favor of ending the assistance that's been provided, and we can only welcome that because that's what we need to stop pumping Ukraine full of weapons, and then the war will end. And then we can look for solutions.